So now we are live to the world out there. It's pretty exciting. Got to mute all the. So we're on. I see that we're on YouTube and double check that we're on LinkedIn. Yep, there we are. So we are live across the board. How exciting. All right, we're going to give a little bit for anyone who wanted to join us live to come on in. And then I'm going ahead and start sharing my screen. We're going to go ahead and let people in. All right. And we'll let people come in as they have. I can see people are watching online, so they're probably eager for us to get started here. But hello, everyone. I'm Thomas Hall, Executive Director of CleanStart. And today we're doing our CleanStart perspective. We are back. We have a series of these coming up, 2 this week, one of course, today. But these are brought to you by SMUD, BlueTech Vally, River City Bank, and the California Mobility Center. All of these are stakeholders in the energy transition, and they all represent different groups that are really accelerating the change. BlueTech Vally is part of the Innovation Club, produced by the California Energy Commission. River City Bank finances green technology projects and has specialty programs to help green technology advance. SMUD, as we know, is our local utility with one of the most aggressive zero emissions goals of 2030, be zero emissions by 2030. And the California Mobility Center is here to scale up and accelerate clean technology and mobility, transportation, grids, all in the Sacramento area. They support us and help us put those on, so please check them out. Also, we get support from the people out there like yourself, who donate and support CleanStart and help me with my energy drinks that I need to get up and do these every day. Thank you for your support there. And if you want to connect with us more or have an idea, you can connect with me at thomas@cleanstart.org. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, and also I have a Calendly that you can go and find and schedule some time. Now, before we get on to our main event, I want to make some quick announcements. On this Thursday, we have CalNext, who is doing research and supporting companies that are decarbonizing buildings. So if you have a technology that could decarbonize a building, make sure that you show up this Thursday to ask some questions about the CalNext program. Additionally, we have an exciting CleanStart perspective on the 5th of January with T Omega, who has a floating wind platform that is looking to reduce the cost of offshore wind. If you've ever looked at the topography of the shore off of California versus where they're putting offshore wind right now, in England and New England too, we don't have the same continental shelf they do. So we need wind innovation to take advantage of all that Governor Newsom's goals of having 25 gigawatts of energy capacity off the shore. We also have CalSEED coming up on the 31st, because they have the CalSEED solicitation, which you're going to hear a little bit about today. And we have an in-person clean tech meetup on the 26th. Join us for all of those. Now, one thing that we've mentioned a bunch here is grants. Tomorrow, Open Grants has a How to Win with Open Grants in 2023. I suggest you go and check it out. And on Thursday, there's a Get Ready to Apply for DOE, SBIR, and other federal grants program at 10 a.m. after our perspective. I'm going to have Brianna share those links out there and put them into various chats. Those are places where you can get resources to build your startup. And also, BlueTech Vally, the Wet Center at Fresno, has the Destination Decarbonization Challenge. This is basically it starts where you go apply, you join, and you take their acceleration, and then you pitch at the end. We're going to be having an upcoming perspective on those, so stay tuned for that. And if you want to go check it out, go look up the Wet Center and Destination Decarbonization Challenge. All right, now on to our main event. So I'm Thomas Hall, and I'm the executive director of CleanStart, and I'm here with Thomas Karagianes, which I hope I did not slaughter too much, which is always my habit there, who's the founder of Tolo Photo. Now, Tolo Photo, we first encountered actually as part of our CEO crash course accelerator. He joined us in our first all virtual one in 2020. And since then, he has taken advantage of a lot of the resources in the ecosystem and has been working to turn Tolo Photo into a economically viable product. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to have a discussion with him right here. First, I want to, welcome you, Thomas, and tell me a little bit about, what inspired you to become, I guess, an entrepreneur or to create Tolo as a startup.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Glad to be here. Tolo actually was founded back in 2015. I co-founded it with Ian McClatchy, who is the former tech lead at Google Street View. So essentially, Tolo's main kind of proposition or insight is that inspection of utility power lines is fundamental for maintenance of those lines. And as you might imagine, we've obviously had some difficulties in that area as of late. And particularly looking forward at the clean energy future, the amount of transmission lines needed vastly, exceeds what we currently have. And all of those lines still need to be maintained. And what's most folks don't know, all of those lines have a legal regulatory requirement to be viewed every single year. You have to inspect those lines every year. But traditional inspection processes they're slow, they're expensive, they're cumbersome, and they're not actually all that good. Either you're climbing the pole and viewing it by eye, which these are, in some cases 50, 70-foot towers. It's very difficult to do that job. Or you're flying by in a helicopter at 60 plus miles per hour and trying to see, again, defects that are smaller than an inch in diameter. So Ian and I realized that with our experience in cameras, we could build a very, very high quality, high resolution camera that can take essentially gigapixel quality images of these these transmission poles, and provide those to inspectors so that you actually have records of what was inspected at a particular day, and you can do the inspection remotely and multiple people can inspect, and there's a bunch of benefits from this remote inspection kind of service. So yeah, entrepreneurially, it just came down to no one seemed to be doing what seemed necessary to solve the problem. From our engineer brains, we said, well, this is what needs to be done, and we have the skills to do it, so let's go make it happen.
I think that's kind of a interesting start. So, I mean, you started with someone who had worked at Google. So, I mean, you're pretty much probably very familiar with startups in that case. So you now have you now do a startup that is around, I guess, the energy and utilities. So when you were kind of looking like, okay, I have a startup to address utilities, what was the kind of, I guess, the first step that you took to try to really figure out what the utility was looking at?
Yeah, I mean, the initial details, we did a lot of the usual entrepreneurial type things. So you start talking to various people that you can get a hold of. We, started reaching out through the network and saying, okay, let's talk to, we spoke to former CFO at Detroit Edison, just anyone we could find in the utility space to talk to them about, okay, how is it being done right now? What are some of the problems with it? And this was back when we first started doing this, 2015, 2016, you can imagine that a bunch of the responses we got were very much along the lines of like, well, no one's going to allow you guys to come in and do this sort of thing. You don't fully understand this industry very well. And that's totally valid. We're engineer, electrical hardware, software engineers. We're coming in from a different industry, different space. once we started realizing there was actually some potential there, the next step back then was pitching VCs. And what was interesting about that process was, again, we only reached out to VCs because that was kind of the experience we'd had in the past. My co-founder's in Silicon Valley, so that's where, that ecosystem lives to some extent. VCs were not super eager to get involved in the utility and energy space. And this, I think, is an ongoing problem in the clean energy kind of transition, is that at least in the past, the utility industry has been perceived by private equity and private industry as being resistant to change, as being very, very slow to innovate in a lot of ways. I don't believe that's necessarily true, but I certainly, the VCs believe it's true. The VCs, the common feedback we got was, well, we'll never be able to support your company for as long as it's going to take for you to get profitable in the clean energy, in the utility ecosystem. It's going to take you 5-10 years before you get your first sale, and we're not going to support a company that long. And so, I mean, that's certainly an understandable perspective from their end, but doesn't make for, we still have to solve this problem. There's a problem outstanding. So if you can't put up the money, who can? And so during 2020, during COVID, I decided to join the CleanStart Crash Course CEO, just to see, okay, well, what are we doing wrong as engineers and not business people? What are the kind of things that we might be approaching differently? And as part of that, one of the things I think you, Thomas, actually mentioned was, hey, there's a CalSEED pitch coming up. If you'd like to go get some more information about this CalSEED program, if you're having difficulty with funding from VCs and whatnot, maybe you should look into some more governmental sources, which we hadn't exactly considered before.
Well, I'm glad I pointed you in that direction. Now, one thing that I really picked up on that you said there, and I think everyone kind of beats it a little bit to death, but is very relevant, is that VC money is not necessarily patient. And finding a funding source that I guess really understands what you're trying to do, and the time frame that they might expect a return, is a really kind of, I guess, a difficult proposition. And CalSEED is there to make that easier. So I'm kind of curious about, so you applied for a CalSEED grant, you got your first CalSEED grant, and then through that you went into the CleanTech Open, which connects you with a lot more people that I think are understanding of the value proposition and the time frame and the constraints around it. What were some of the I guess the things that you learned, or doors that were kind of open through that, where you're like, okay, here's how we need to change or adjust, or here's something we can take advantage of? What was something that made you go, I really wish I knew this 2 years ago?
Yeah. What was, I guess, most helpful about CleanTech Open? CleanTech Open did put us in contact with a lot of individuals, which was helpful, a lot of networking style connections. The most difficult part for us has been finding partner utilities. It's not that utilities aren't interested in these sorts of technologies. It's that I think traditionally many utilities feel that no one outside of their industry has any insight into their industry. So we've received feedback from various utilities about, we don't understand what's different about your product compared to what we're currently doing internally. We bought a drone off Amazon and now we're flying it around, and aren't we doing what you're doing? And the answer, of course, is no. You take 70 photos and we take 100,000. So there's a big difference in quantity and scale and a bunch of different things, but it's difficult. It's difficult to get that across just by, here it is, without an obvious demonstration, without, well, can we go fly around your utility, your infrastructure, and show you what is different about our system compared to your systems? There's a secondary consideration, which I don't think the utilities have fully committed to just yet, which is that moving to remote inspection internally as a utility isn't necessarily going to save you any money, and it's not necessarily going to improve your inspection process just by the fact of I took pictures now, because they were taking pictures before with handheld DSLRs and things like that. There are a number of different difficulties in that space, just in terms of getting folks to understand what needs to be done. The current, the current flavor of the month right now is artificial intelligence being used to recognize faults in the utility network. Now, aside from the obvious flaws in that plan, artificial intelligence is not very reliable. And for those of us who've worked in Silicon Valley, we can tell you it's really not as reliable as it may appear. It may be useful, and there's some, we certainly do have artificial intelligence on our platform. It's used initially for categorization passes to then kind of flag suspicious questions to send to further inspectors to say, hey, the AI found this and said it's not sure what this is, or it's not sure if this is safe or not. Go ahead and take a look. It's just, I think the most difficult thing in the ecosystem is just engaging with the utilities, because there is a strong internal bias of, well, we've got folks on staff who can figure it out. And that's not to say they can't. Of course they can, but every utility is doing the same work over and over and over again, and some will come to better results than others. And we need to have kind of more sharing, more standardization outside. That's what you see in the rest of the tech ecosystem.
So have you been able to, at least, it sounds like you've been able to talk to some utilities that are, I guess, in the investor-owned utilities. What were some ways that, of course, they're risk adverse. They want to have kind of everything internally, but there is a lot of pressure for them to open up and talk to people. What were some tools that you used to be able to actually, open the doors and at least get a meeting with an investor-owned utility? Was it someone through, through a network?
Yeah, connections through CleanTech Open actually opened a number of those doors. Similarly, connections through CalSEED, one of our cohort companies, has had a little more success, and we've been working with them to try to open up more doors through some of the utilities that they've partnered with. Yeah, the biggest thing is network.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of regulatory pressures also in the space there. How much have you engaged with, I guess, regulators? Because I kind of want to, highlight, CalSEED, which has benefited you a lot, is somewhat the brainchild of the CEC and other groups realizing that there's this valley of death, which you very much articulated that VCs are not interested in participating in, and then the need to get new technologies out there. What has been kind of the response or support from, I guess, the regulatory groups, whether the CEC or the CPUC, when it comes to your technology?
Yeah, right. The regulatory groups have been, I mean, again, as you mentioned, CalSEED is a CPUC program, and obviously it's had tremendous success in spurring some of these innovations that may not have kind of seen the light of day otherwise, without the support of the commission. One of the aspects, when I say regulatory, one of the aspects is there are reams and reams of regulations surrounding how inspections must be conducted, in terms of how frequently they must be done and things like that. What we don't have really great regulations around just yet is how remote inspection will be conducted, what kind of resolutions are required, what kind of coverage is required, what kind of inspection is required. To some extent, it's somewhat concerning to us at Tolo to hear that some utilities have stopped using in-person inspectors and are now using artificial intelligence to scan their photos instead. That seems to be kind of a step away from having a human in the decision loop, which seems like a bad idea to us. We understand why. It's difficult to view the kind of imagery, the scale of imagery that sometimes certainly that we're proposing. We have solutions to that, but The biggest thing is regulatory. This is new technology, and as is common with regulators, it has to be demonstrated and used and figured out before we can come to any kind of really good ideas about here's what the regulations ought to be. I mean, this technology is so new, any kind of context of what the required resolution would be is not something that's been discussed, certainly. And again, mostly utilities are right now implementing remote inspection as kind of supplementary to their existing inspection efforts. So the big, at least from the investor-owned utilities, the kind of line to the CPUC is, well, don't worry, we're still doing our regular inspections. This is just, we're exploring a new idea, we're trying out new things, which, you know, great. I'm glad to hear that there is some movement in this area. There didn't used to be. I mean, back when we first approached in 2015 and said we're going to fly drones around your power lines, the answer was no way are you ever flying drones around our power lines. Now, of course, everyone's realized, oh, okay, well, it can be done safely, and that's actually one of Tolo's pitches: is our cameras designed so that you can fly 3 to 4 times further away than a standard off-the-shelf drone. We take safety very, very seriously in that respect. But the regulations just need to catch up, and they will as the technology starts rolling out in the real world.
So the last thing you're hitting on there is, you know, there's always an inherent risk in new technology, and the VCs, you know, the timeline makes it, you know, makes them kind of risk adverse to it. The utilities, just by their inherent nature, are risk adverse to it. What are some, you know, resources that you've tried to take advantage of, or you really wish were there to kind of, I guess, de-risk or prove your technology, so that, you know, maybe at some point a VC or utility looks at it and says, like, this is not the risk that I thought it was, and it's worth my time to invest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The big push that we've been working on, aside from, you know, the working to further develop the technology, I mean, there's a lot of complexity in taking 100 gigabytes of imagery of every transmission tower in a network. There's a lot of technical detail that has to be worked out there about how it works and how to inspect all that and that sort of thing. The biggest thing, and the thing that we're currently working on, is getting actual pilot demonstration sort of projects together with really any partner utility. With some of our like cohort companies in CalSEED, some of their technologies can be demonstrated on a lab bench. And CalSEED actually understands this. They have the Cal Testbed program, which comes after CalSEED. So another grant you can apply for. And the idea is that's partnered up with various universities in the UC system and various kind of testing partners to test things like, I know one of our cohort companies has a different battery technology that kind of is optimized for smaller scale motors and some things like that. So it's kind of geared more for like electric lawnmowers and things like that. That can be demonstrated on a lab bench. Our technology can't really be demonstrated on a lab bench. What it needs to demonstrate is actual infrastructure, utility, transmission poles, distribution poles, and that sort of thing. So, you know, like, for example, we've talked about this. We've reached out to SMUD, and we're hoping to kind of generate a partnership there with SMUD's Power Academy, right? SMUD has a testing ground that they use to teach inspectors how to inspect, that has a range of different transmission infrastructure, distribution infrastructure, basically just a bunch of equipment in a spot where you can train your inspectors on here's how to climb and things like that. It'd be a great place for us to just go fly our camera around, take a bunch of pictures and say, okay, this worked, here's what didn't work. I mean, obviously we can't go fly we certainly are not going to go fly our drones around utility infrastructure in the real world operating right now. We want a lot more testing and proof before we can say, yes, this is exactly how it's going to work. Here's the, you know, we've dialed it all in. It's going to work great.
That actually sounds like a huge opportunity, because I know with the energy transition, we're talking about a lot of infrastructure changes. And I mean, even with things as simple as building decarbonization, you still have really risk adverse people, and there's all this work that's done, in the lab, but at the end of the day, the person who's making the purchase or the decision to do or to change their technology isn't really from the lab. And it's got to make kind of dollars and cents. And the SMUD Power Academy, I know SMUD's probably one of the most open and accessible utilities in our state. Um, but I think that would be a great place to do, and we'll always try to make sure to talk to SMUD about that. Now, when it comes, what's the next step for you? You got the first CalSEED award, you got a second CalSEED award. So what's the next step for Tolo and the ecosystem?
Yeah. So we won the concept award, and then the follow-on funding, the prototype award. That's kind of we're focusing on trying to take that funding and develop the technology a little further, and get demonstration partnerships with with any real utility we've reached out to. I mean, we're definitely not. We have a limited number of utilities in California. We've got a fair amount, but we've obviously been reaching elsewhere as well, Colorado and Oregon, and trying to find relatively local utilities that would make it a little easier for us testing wise. There is some work to be done on a technical aspect from some of what we've done. One of the things that we've done is that allows us to get away from some of the issues is to actually go test out our camera, not on a drone, but on the ground. You can do some inspection that way. And it allows us to at least go through and say, okay, well, here's what's working about the camera. Here's what doesn't work about the camera. Here's what we need to fix in our second revision of the hardware. So that's on the list. And then there's just a number of different opportunities in the ecosystem that we learned about through CleanTech Open and CalSEED and that sort of thing. So EPRI has a yearly competition, Incubate Energy, which is kind of, you pitch what your technology is, you pitch the kind of focus behind it, and then their network of partner utilities, hopefully someone says, ooh, that's a really good idea, we want to see it ourselves, and then they'll partner with you. A particular utility will kind of raise their hand and say, yeah, we'll take on a pilot partnership. So that's something we're interested in pursuing in the future, for sure.
What's something that you think you've done well that's enabled you to get, a lot of this funding here? Because there's people that are, they want to apply for CalSEED. Some of them might have applied, but, didn't end up winning. What were some things that you think you did well when it came to describing, I guess, or applying for CalSEED?
Yeah. I think one of the things that helped a lot was that I think for a lot of folks, when they first enter CTO or something like that, what they'll find is they have a technology, but they haven't identified a problem that needs to be solved. Right? I mean, that's the fundamental kind of consideration here with all of this, is that you build a business, not a technology, right? If you're building a technology, well, that's great, but if it doesn't actually solve someone's problem in the real world, you can't create a sustainable business out of it. And for those of us who are interested in the clean tech ecosystem and helping kind of reduce energy's impact on the world, building a sustainable system that our technology can continue to operate and continue to do good, that's really important. So the first step for us was making sure there actually is a market here. There's a problem that we can solve. The problem is worth money. All of that is stuff that I think a lot of folks, when they first come into the ecosystem, haven't exactly nailed down. And it's one of the things certainly that we kind of refined through CleanTech Open was, do you really understand your business pitch? Do you really understand kind of how this makes economic sense and how it makes does it actually work, right? Do the economics end up working out, or is this just a technology for technology's sake? I think the next thing then, as to part of why we got why the prototype funding may have come around our way, is we actually did the technological work to some extent. I mean, we have a prototype that we actually can use, and we actually were making progress on the CalSEED unlocked a lot of ability to continue to make progress on the technology that wouldn't have been available if we were just kind of garage tinkering.
So two things I want to highlight to people out there is, that you said is, one, when you're identifying, the market or the people who are actually going to use it as a sustainable technology, being able to clearly identify how that's, in CalSEED, a California ratepayer, and how it's going to benefit them. And then, you said meeting your goals. That's very important in a grant. And there's plenty of entrepreneurs out there who go and they pitch grants that they would pitch to a VC, with exponential returns. But part of it is, saying like, here's what I'm going to do. And if someone gives you a grant and you do exactly what you said, they're a whole lot more likely to go and want to give you a grant again, because you delivered on what you said. You didn't overpromise, you didn't, underpromise, you delivered. Now I'm going to call on, Gary, who I've been seeing taking notes, founder of CleanStart, to see, do you have any questions or comments to put on? You're muted. You're muted. There you go.
Just the classic one, Thomas. If you had it to do all over again, what would you do different? Is there anything that you could see now that you could have avoided?
Yeah, I think I would have tried to engage the CleanTech ecosystem a little sooner. We spent several years in the VC pitch ecosystem, and that didn't really lead anywhere. So perhaps if the system had been flipped, right, if we'd engaged the CleanTech ecosystem and kind of the granting bodies before we went and started pitching to VCs, we could have saved ourselves some time and some headache. I think the other big one is just every time I go through, one of the things that we struggled with CleanTech Open was our mentor, and we didn't exactly have a whole lot of we didn't get as much out of that relationship as we'd hoped. And to some extent, that was partly our fault. We were very heads down on the technology, and we were not making, time for weekly meetings, daily meetings, whatever it was the mentor had in their schedule and availability. So yeah, kind of the more general approach, the more general kind of feedback I'd give there is, if someone's offering you some advice, listen to it. It doesn't mean that you necessarily take it, but like, take advantage of those opportunities when you have them, because you don't always have access to opportunities like that. Someone taking the time to say, let me listen to your pitch. I'm going to go hear you. Okay, well, what about this? Let me ask you this critical question, and things like that. It definitely, you never know. I mean, kind of like how I got into CalSEED. You never know what meeting you attend will lead to some useful piece of information that opens up some doors in the future.
Well, one of the things we talked about in the crash course that you took was the best information comes when you finally have a customer saying, I've got to have it. Have you gotten a customer like that? It sounds like you're still searching for the I got to have it, and dealing with some skeptical customers.
Well, I think what we've seen, at least with some of the customers that we've talked to so far, is that it's still very early days for this technology. So there are some customers who are saying, I've got to have it, which is why I went and bought a drone off Amazon and am now just flying this drone around and taking pictures. And they're running into the same sort of things that we did when we first started attempting to do similar things, fly around, take a bunch of pictures. Oh, there's a lot of difficulty involved in how you actually process this imagery. And so I think a lot of our customers are going through the same kind of learning we were going through 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago. So we haven't yet found the customer who said, I've got to have it, and I understand your value proposition. I understand why the tool you've built is better than a tool I bought off Amazon, right? I mean, this is a fundamental problem with utilities. Utilities are really, really good at, and this is a problem I'd argue with many industries. A lot of industries the folks operating within the industry are really good at operating within the industry. That doesn't mean that they are good at building the tools that they need to perform most efficiently, right? Surgeons may not be the best ones to build the tools that they use in surgery. They know how to use them very effectively, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best suited to build the tools that they need. So I think to some extent, the utilities are kind of running in, at least in some of the partners that we've spoke to, they are running into the same sorts of issues wherein they say, oh, well, we tested that out for ourselves and it didn't seem to work. We had real difficulty when we bought a DJI drone and started flying it around. And we say, we know we've done the same, which is why we have a different solution, a little custom camera designed exactly for what you need. And of course, you know, utilities are risk averse, and I can understand their concern there. So eventually, I'm sure we'll find that customer who kind of unlocks that door. I mean, that was the same thing with one of our CalSEED cohort companies, Gridware. They had a lot of difficulty until they found that one utility, this small, you know, very small community utility. I think it was in Colorado, maybe. Who offered to test their technology, and then they had real world demonstration and could shop that around to others. I mean, to some extent, the issue that we're running into is a classic issue for new businesses, which is what's your social proof, right? What is the evidence that you have that your tech actually solves this problem? And the answer is, well, we have our evidence internally, we have what we've done, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's convincing.
So, I mean, a high resolution camera mounted on some aerial platform. What other industries might be interested in something like this? Do people need to inspect cell phone towers, water conveyance structures, remote roads? I have no idea.
Yeah, at windmills. Actually, one of our a company we were working with in the past was doing inspection on bridges and things like that, or attempting to do an inspection on bridges. There's a wide range of different industries that could benefit. Again, there's a difference between the industries who could benefit and the industries who are making do with what they have. Cell phone tower inspections are done by drone today. They're done, I would argue, ineffectively, certainly ineffectively when you actually see what I mean, for context, our camera has, roughly speaking, a millimeter GSD. What that means is 1 pixel in the image is equivalent to a millimeter in the real world. So when you compare imagery side by side, the imagery taken by a standard drone, the imagery taken by our camera, it's night and day in terms of what you can see and the confidence that what you're looking at is what was there, as opposed to, you know, if you look at a standard drone cell phone tower inspection, there are not that many pictures. They're from a limited range of angles. There's a bunch of difficulty associated with that. But yeah, there are a number of other industries. The only reason we chose utilities was because we could get in the door through CleanStart. We could get in the door through CalSEED.
Well,
yeah.
but you said something very interesting there, inspection of bridges, which is a problem. You don't see the corrosion until you're up close and personal.
Yep.
And getting the equipment under a bridge and getting somebody on a lift bucket to take a look is an expensive proposition.
Yeah.
With the resolution that you've got, and for example, the collapse of the bridge on I-35 in Minneapolis shocked a whole lot of highway engineers. They had no idea that corrosion was going on. You know, that sounds like an I gotta have it to go and inspect all those bridges carefully. And you know, the corrosion was in some spots they didn't even think of looking. So I'm not suggesting you change your business plan, but very interesting what you've got there. And you know, there are some other real world problems where you know, it might be more of a I gotta have it moment, particularly with the infrastructure bill, all the analysis that has to be done on bridges in order to do that. So
Yeah, bridges do have a similar regulatory requirement of arm's length inspection by inspectors. And yes, as you've identified, it is exceedingly expensive to get inspectors up underneath a bridge to actually get in the right position. The biggest reason we haven't exactly tackled in bridge inspection immediately is when you capture resolution at the imagery at the scale we capture. I mean, for an average transmission pole, there are factors that you can tweak, but for the average transmission pole, we're talking about 100,000 images. To actually inspect 100,000 images requires a different inspection tool. So we have a custom built interface that allows an inspector to actually inspect images, but not image by image, right? Traditionally, how remote inspection is done is that an inspector looks at an image, and then they look at the next picture, and then they look at the next picture, and they look at it's basically a slideshow of a bunch of different pictures of here's a thing, here's a thing, here's a thing. Tolo's system takes comprehensive imagery of the entire structure, and that allows us to do some fancy math and some fancy, secret sauce kind of stuff to create what we call the lens interface, the Tolo lens interface, which is a different user interface for inspection. It works well for transmission towers. We don't have it worked out just yet for bridges. The way that you would have to inspect the underside of a bridge and how you would go about actually getting through that imagery is not fully realized with bridges. So that's another aspect of why we were targeting utilities first, is because we know how it's done. We know it works. The tech works. The underlying kind of data processing works. Not quite there with bridges yet.
It's interesting for obscure reasons. I used to go to the corrosion conferences. And that's where you find a lot of people worried about that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of engaging, the ecosystem, if I wanted to find out more about what inspectors were doing and what they needed, and whether they thought I had a good idea and what kind of interface they needed, I'd go to one of the corrosion conferences. So they're usually labeled like Corrosion 2022 or something like that. But huge problem in that area, and big public safety concern. So there's a lot of public interest in it. You've really come a long way, and just the innovations in the camera, and now you've got an analysis system coming up. Kudos. And I'm so glad you got the first and second phase awards with CalSEED, because I think that's really refined the technology you've got.
Yeah, it's given us the opportunity to push forward in a lot of spaces that we didn't have the opportunity to push forward on before. Yeah, I mean, CalSEED and the CleanTech ecosystem has definitely made our company more of a company than it ever was.
Yeah, well, that's really quite rewarding. So I would just say to our audience, we are going to do another crash course in the spring of 23. And, there have been several companies born out of those crash courses. So I think worth considering, even if you're in the midst of building a company right now. Sometimes it's just good to get another perspective. And I think that's something that you had seen in it, Thomas. So anyway, thanks very much for your time this morning. Let me turn it back to Thomas. Paul.
the other Thomas.
The other Thomas.
Yeah. Oh, I want to highlight anyone who thinks you can go and just, get cameras off the shelf and do something. Go and try to live stream your own event somewhere, or try to make a professional video, and you'll soon start to realize that it takes a lot of kind of a knowledge, and it's not just a camera doing all of it. There's some knowledge that's needed in there. So I want to thank Thomas for joining us today. I also want to thank everyone here for attending, and those watching live, encourage you to check out our next events, Cal Next, this Thursday at 9 a.m., T Omega on the 5th of January, and CalSEED on the 31st. And look for our next CleanTech meetup in person on the 26th. I want to thank our sponsors and those of you who have donated. I also want to give an additional thanks to our overall program sponsors. And with that, I'm going to end the live stream and thank everyone out there who watched and for attending. Thank you very much, Thomas.
Yeah, before you turn off the live stream, just let me pitch the perspectives coming up with T Omega. If we're going to have offshore wind in California, it's going to be floating for the reasons that we discussed. And we need to drastically reduce the cost of a floating offshore platform. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. There's a number of companies now focused on that. The first auctions of offshore leases 20 miles offshore are underway. So that's a big deal. And then the meetup coming on the 26th of January, the theme of that is show me the money. This tidal wave of money coming from the federal government through the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, other things. And it takes a lot of work to master where that money is and how to go get it. So we want to talk with those that know the most about it right now and try to give people some hints as to what they could be doing. But you know, there's like $100 billion available or more, and it's astounding. Just want to make sure that people are aware of what some of those opportunities are. So wanted to pitch that.
Excellent. Look for it in our CleanStart newsletter. And hopefully see more of you guys in the future. All right.